Good morning, I'm Joel Am, and I am in jail. Apparently. I do not know what crimes I could have committed to put me in here, but thankfully I did manage to break out so I could grab my cell phone so I can watch Bluey. You know, I have a lot of free time on my hands, so I might as well finish what I started. In my last two videos, I discussed how Chilli and Bingo probably have supernatural powers called magic, and then I examined the episode Adventure and discovered the presence of a suppressive regime originating at the Australian penal colonies. And while that's fine and all, there's one enigma at the center of all this that actually sent me down on this rabbit hole in the first place. One mystery that is simultaneously the most important thing in Bluey lore, and yet we know nothing about them. Or should I say, knew nothing about them. Hold on tight to the mum-brella and watch out for strange rings of rocks, because today I am finally uncovering the dark lore of fairies. What are they? Why are they here? What are their plans? I think I know, and it all starts with our titular episode. Fairies is one of the oddest episodes in all of Bluey, but if you've watched my previous videos, you would have already known that. But assuming you haven't watched it, let me explain. In this episode, the entire Healer family is terrorized by what the adults identify as fairies, all because Banner was too busy to look at Bingo's domino heart. Now strange, weird stuff is happening, like magic rings of rocks that make you dance, roller skates appearing on Bandit's hands, our Bingo literally getting frozen. The weird thing—
Hey! You better not be doing any funny business in there.
No?
Alright, good enough for me.
The weird thing about this episode is, unlike most episodes like this, where it is left mostly open-ended, Fairies literally ends with the grand reveals that fairies actually do exist. This one example of the supernatural is what led me to the conclusions in the previous two videos about the orange healers having powers, and while that's fine and all, there's still questions. Why did the fairies feel the need to attack the healers in the first place? Well, to answer that, let's go to the next episode where the fairies show up, The Adventure. I spent an entire video talking about the historical significance of this episode, but I didn't really talk about the fairy in this episode. In this play pretend adventure, a fairy grandma shows up to help the brave princess along her journey, provide her with useful information, even give her a magic tennis ball. If my last video is correct and The Adventure is historically important to the show's lore, then this is an interesting insight into the origins of the fairies, especially because it's something I cut from that episode that is very interesting. The fairies appear to come specifically from Ireland, and therefore by extension the magic users as well. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, there's the song that I showed in the last episode from Asparagus. The Mord Bay song is a real-life song about the hardships the Australian penal colonies went through. Why do I bring this up? Well, one of the lyrics literally say, "I am a native of Erin's Island, but banished now to the fatal shore." And also the music from Fairies is a classic Irish song with John Ryan's polka. Probably should have led with that evidence, actually. So the fairies come from Ireland. Why is that important? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I've been trying to research Irish mythology, but unfortunately, the prison library is small, so I apologize. But from what I've gathered, several things do line up. For example, in Irish mythology, fairies have complex relationships with humans, sometimes helping them but also being vengeful on those that disrespect them. For example, in The Storyteller at Fault, the king tries to execute a fairy, but every time he finds one of his important people in the gallows instead. But interestingly, after the king gives up, the fairy then revives all of his dead friends. Mischievous, vengeful, cheeky, but ultimately good behavior lines up perfectly with the fairies. Wait, cheeky, where have I heard that word before?
The rule is never use magic for cheekiness.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It always bothered me how Chilli described magic in the episode Magic. But if you look at it from the perspective of my last video, it suddenly makes sense. There is no difference between cheeky magic and goodly magic. If you want proof of that, just look at the fairies. They did all sorts of mischievous stuff with their powers in their titular episode, but why did they do it? They did it because they knew that Bingo thought her father didn't love her anymore. And so they set out to prove to her that, hey, Bandit would do anything for his kids. Even Irish step dance around a mailbox in front of the entire neighborhood. And so the stuff that Chilli says in Magic is just misinformation by whatever powers that be that keep the magic users down. You can imagine these people saying stuff like, magic should be used for goodliness and magic should be everyone's. Which explains a lot about the oddness about her in this episode. Speaking of oddness, this is a graph that shows how many of my viewers are subscribed. And this is a graph that shows how many of my unsubscribed viewers suffer inexplicable fatal accidents in the middle of the night. Oh wait, that's probably why I'm in jail. Anyway, back to the adventure. I find it odd how close Fairy Grandma seems to be with this brave princess. In fact, her name itself is strange. Fairy Grandma, isn't it usually Fairy Godmother? You see, godparents are a system set up by the Catholic Church. It's basically, hey kids, see these people? Well, if your parents die, you're stuck with them. It's basically backup parents in case something bad happens to your current ones. If you want an example, look no further than the episode Double Babysitters. Mom and Dad are going on a date, so who shows up? That's right, Bluey's fairy godmother, Frisky. But that shows that Bluey is very familiar with the concept of godparents because she has one. And it's not a lack of exposure because we see them read the fairy tale Cinderella in the Bluey shorts with the same name.
Suddenly, the fairy godmother appeared. Poof!
Her name is Madge.
Madge appeared and said, "G'day, darling."
Bluey doesn't even call her grandmother Grandma, she calls her Nana, so without the possibility of human error, that leaves us with one choice. The fairies actually are grandmas. Now, once again, details can get lost when historical events are told from the perspective of a play pretend game, and so I don't think the fairies actually were a grandmother to a brave princess. But what if instead this is the origins of the magic users in the first place? Both fairies and magic users seem to share several of the same powers, like controlling another person's body or freezing them. So it would make sense that in some point in history, probably not long before whenever the adventure takes place, a fairy and a human fell in love, resulting in a child with a human form, but with the powers of a fairy. It would also explain why the fairy seems so interested in the emotional state of Bingo, because depending on the lifespan of a fairy, Bingo is either their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter or a cousin. You will also notice that the fairies do almost nothing to Chilli aside from put a clothespins on her chin, which I can do just fine without help from fairies, thank you very much. One last episode which fairies are mentioned in is Barky Boats. While this is one of my personal favorite episodes for the themes of growing up and the fun plot and the amazing music, there is one detail that always stuck out to me as odd. In this episode, Bluey and her buddy Mia build a fairy garden, but despite being called a garden, it honestly looks more like a small village with the houses, bridges, and even a windmill. In fact, it reminds me of another village, one in the episode Calypso made for the gnomes. You know, that always bothered me. Gnomes are set up with themes of being wise and protective and are given a town, so why use those same themes on the fairies? Narratively speaking, having two mystical species with the same narrative purpose is simply redundant. Just like me saying narrative 2 times in one sentence. But also, in my last video, I talked in depth about the gnomes and how they are actually stand-in reminders of the past atrocities caused by magic users. And any personality added to them is simply revisionist history. But hold on, what are they revising? I think it's fairies. Think about it. Fairies and gnomes share the same themes minus the whole magic and cheeky things. So wouldn't it stand to reason that every single time you hear a tale about the gnomes in this world, what you're actually seeing is a watered down fairy story? Fairies are just as outlawed as magic users in this world. They are hidden in a world that has replaced them and forgotten them. But you might ask, why didn't the fairies fight back against the tyranny like in The Storyteller at Fault? And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but it probably has something to do with how the magic users got banished in the first place. You can't hurt the fairies, but there is nothing stopping you from hurting the fairies' kids. But before I go, while editing, another episode actually came to my attention, and that is space. See, this is primarily a Mackenzie episode, but after going through a black hole and encountering some emotional trauma, he emerges out the other side and finds Bluey, Chloe, and Indy wearing wings, large glasses, and antenna in an oversaturated field of flowers and mushrooms. After pulling Mackenzie out, the space crew identify the girls as aliens, but they are obviously playing 2 different games, because you hear the girls say stuff like, and so, are they playing a game where they are fairies? We do see that Grandma Fairy from the adventure wears glasses and wings resembling butterfly wings, though the fairies have never been depicted with antenna. It's still interesting, especially since if you ignore the handful of dream sequences in the entirety of stories, this is the only Bluey episode where you are assumedly not expected to take what you are seeing literally. But you do know what they say about assuming. Moving on. Maybe this could be a reference to another piece of Irish folklore where the fairies appear to reside in some sort of otherworld alternate dimension only accessible through fairy rings. Now, do I think he somehow actually traveled dimensions with the help of Calypso? No, at least not right now. However, I do think Ludo Studios is planting some ideas in our heads. Did you know that one of the upcoming episodes, assumedly the season finale, it will be a triple long episode? Just an interesting fact. But with that happy note, I think I'm done with this video. It's a bit shorter than the last two, but that's mostly just because there was less information to work with. Fairies are only shown in 1 episode and only mentioned in 3. Well, 4 episodes if you count Markets, because they talk about the Tooth Fairy, but judging off of Bandit's reaction to seeing how much money the Tooth Fairy gave Bluey, I think it's safe to assume that she isn't just as real as the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. That is to say, not real at all. Ho 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 and a Merry Easter, y'all. Ultimately, this was all just a theory, and probably the last one I'm gonna do for now. I have nothing else bugging me about this show currently, but who knows? Someone might leave another comment on my channel that flips my entire worldview. Until then,
Is that a cell phone?
have a wonderful day!
Oh no, where'd he go? Not good, not good. Sir, he's escaped.
Huh. It's okay. We got what we needed.
Wait, wasn't there a fairy in Blue Mountains? You couldn't pay me to talk about that episode.